So good evening.
Good evening.
And welcome again to those joining us off the island. The Gospel today is another version in St. Matthew of the one that we looked at yesterday about the Last Supper and the identification of the betrayer. And I think there must be something important about this theme of betrayal. It must be a key and a way into the redemptive meaning of the whole of Holy Week. So I think we should probably follow the order and listen again to this description of the betrayal of Jesus, which takes place, as you remember, at this moment in which he gives himself over to the world, first of all to his immediate companions, but gives himself over, hands himself over to what becomes the church through this sacred ritual. What becomes what was already a sacred ritual. And perhaps it's in this idea of handing over of yourself, the giving over of yourself, that we understand why it is contrasted so painfully and with such confusion, really, with betrayal, because the word betrayal itself comes from the Latin tradere, which means to hand over. So a betrayal is where you hand over, or you literally, it's betrayal to give away. You give, tradare, to give, you give away something that is precious, something that is sacred, something that is you have been faithful to. So betrayal is the opposite, the mirror opposite of what Jesus is doing in his sacrifice, his offering of himself. And whenever we offer our whole self, we put our whole self into something and give ourselves through that offering of maybe time or relationship or work. When we put ourselves wholeheartedly into something, that is a sacrifice, and we make it sacred. It's made sacred by the wholeness of the gift of self, by the holiness of our wholeness. Our holiness is our wholeness. And whenever we do something wholeheartedly, it is something that is sacred and something that can bless and enrich and enhance others. So this is the meaning of sacrifice, and in Christian theology, the celebration of the Eucharist is the same actually as the cross. It's the same sacrifice. We can only understand one aspect of it, the Eucharist, in the light of the other aspect of it, which is the self-giving of the cross, the throwing himself totally open, without resentment, without vindictiveness, without the desire for revenge, in the spirit of forgiveness, which is a total acceptance of the people who are betraying him, who are rejecting him unjustly and unfairly. So this is his sacrifice, and these are different ways of seeing into what he is doing and why it is affecting us and influencing us if we see it. And of course we will only see it, we'll only relate to it if it is explained to us, or if we are introduced to it. And this is the tragedy when the transmission of faith is interrupted in a culture which can no longer tell the story, and where the meaning of the story and even the story itself has been garbled or has been reduced almost to nothing in the popular culture. This is a shame. So we can only really connect to this story into the meaning of it through a tradition of faith, through people who are exploring it, or who have been touched by it, or who have some sense of what it means and want to pass this on, to transmit it. We were talking about this direct transmission today. Well, the direct transmission of the Spirit is something that we enter into in meditation. However, we also need to be able to understand the experience as far as we can in order to expand ourselves to the deeper richness and meaning and consequences of the experience. So we do need to reflect upon it. We need to share, not just in a cold analytical way, but we need to reflect upon it within a community of faith, which is what we will start doing tomorrow through the liturgy. And that's what the liturgy is. It's simply a coming together of people either sharing the same faith, or maybe sharing different degrees of faith, or welcoming into their number people who are sniffing around and are searching. So we can never exclude anybody from this community of faith. We can't turn it into a fundamentalist group and claim that everybody on the outside is inferior or is damned. I mean, that is to deny the whole dynamic of the story, which is inclusive. And Jesus gives himself to Judas and to Peter. So we cannot exclude anyone from this communion if Jesus doesn't. What right do we have to turn that Christian community into a kind of club or a sect, which quite clearly is not in the way Jesus creates it and serves it. So anyway, so this is it's in the community, and through these symbolic rituals that we celebrate in the liturgy of the next 3 days, beginning tomorrow, we are invited and actually drawn to understand more clearly what the experience we are entering into in meditation, in the contemplative dimension, is about. And it's bringing together in this way the mind and the heart, through the story, through the symbols, through the ritual, through the community, but always grounded in this experience of the direct transmission. So this is what we mean by a contemplative celebration of the liturgy. It's bringing together the two sides of the island, the apophatic and the cataphatic, or the two sides of our brain, the left and the right hemispheres. So betrayal, to hand over, is really a negation or a mirror image or a perversion of sacrifice. Sacrifice is where you give your whole self to others, by making a wholehearted, integral gift of yourself. That's what makes it a sacrifice, and it's what makes it life-giving and sacred. But of course, for that, there has to be this notion of pure gift. The sacrifice has to be done unconditionally and without looking at the small print. if we, as we often do, make a gift in a way that puts a demand on others, maybe demanding gratitude or demanding something in return, we are compromising the purity and the totality of the gift. It's no longer working in this wholehearted way. So we have to aim to make this pure gift of self, which many people would say is impossible. That it's not in human nature to do that. That we always want to get something out of it. We want recognition, we want the love or gratitude of the other person. Can we really do anything that is unconditional? Well, the story that we are telling and that we are entering into shows us that this is possible. And that is the whole meaning of the sacrifice of Jesus. Which begins, remember, at the Last Supper, the giving of himself. I have shared everything of myself with you. And his neutralizing of the act of betrayal by accepting the person and the betrayal at the same time. So what we do see in Jesus is precisely this total act, this total gift of self. So this is what he's doing, the sacrifice, is the mirror opposite of betrayal. But betrayal is almost inevitable in human experience. There's an expression translators are well aware of, tradire. To translate something is to betray it. Mm-hmm. Something gets lost in the translation. And the translator has to live with that slippage of meaning, and the translator knows that they can't just go with a literal dictionary definition. They have to, of each word, like in a Google translation, but they have to understand the meaning, the essential meaning of the original, and then do their best to communicate that in their own language, which is sometimes we keep trying that, don't we? We keep translating the great works of literature into every 10 years or so there's a new translation of War and Peace, or so we need to be conscious that betrayal is part of the human condition. If we deny that, we are living in a sort of perfectionist world, or an idealized world. We're denying the reality of betrayal. And if that's the case, then we need to be able to recognize the signs of betrayal. And we all betray. We all betray in some way or another. We don't think of ourselves as Judas. Other people may. They will. But I don't think Judas probably saw himself as a Judas figure, whatever his reason for doing what he did was. In fact, it's good that we don't know what his reason is, because we can more easily see his meaning in us. So in relationships, for example, what are the signs of betrayal? Would be the loss of fidelity, for whatever reason, the breaking of a promise, commitment, or an unwillingness. Maybe the first sign would be an unwillingness to sacrifice for the other anymore. It's more difficult to make this gift of self and to sacrifice what you need to give up or to give away for the other, or for the relationship itself. And these are painful realities in all human relationships at some point or other. And what I think we can see in the Gospel account is a wisdom of love, of grace, in other words, receiving help from beyond ourselves, a wisdom of love and of grace that enables us to deal with the inevitable reality of betrayal. And I think if we don't, this flaw, this sin, really inherent in the human condition, can be very corrupting. It can corrupt and destroy a relationship. We begin to lie, we begin to deceive, we begin to develop a coldness where before there was warmth and love. So, no one chooses this. No one, and because we don't choose it, sometimes it's covered up with deception, infidelity, deceiving others or the other. But we don't see ourselves as Judas. We see, and quite probably rightly or accurately, that something is changing in the relationship. And this change within the relationship is not my choice or the other person's choice, but it's happening and it has to be dealt with, it has to be acknowledged. In many relationships that we're going through these difficult periods, there is a denial or a refusal to admit it, and therefore often a denial or refusal to have outside help. Anyway, these are difficult to make large generalizations because, of course, every relationship has a unique kind of sacred quality. Relationships are the sacred ground of our lives, and we walk on that ground delicately because our relationships are unique and express our uniqueness and our capacity to give ourselves wholeheartedly. This is what Oscar Wilde said about it. Yet each man kills the thing he loves. By each let this be heard. Some do it with a bitter look, some by a flattering word. The coward does it with a kiss, the brave man with a sword. So, he wrote that in prison. He put himself in prison, but he also realized that he had been deceived. No doubt he had deceived. He saw his relationship that led to his imprisonment in a new light. There's a character in The Plague by Camus that says, "There's no one I have loved that I did not eventually betray." So this is a bit of a what is it? It's a if we go into the meaning of this aspect of the story, and I think we don't get into the story unless we do face this element of betrayal. If we do, it throws a very bright light, accusing light almost, or very real light on our capacity for relationship. Now, that doesn't mean to say that we are all capable of betrayal, it doesn't mean that we are all wanting to betray. It means that every commitment we make, I mean, after all, it's much easier to forgive an enemy who has done something against you than it is to forgive a friend or someone with whom you have been intimate or trusted yourself. It's much more difficult to forgive the one you loved, who you feel has betrayed you, or who has. But so what I think it shows us is that when we make a commitment, we'll see this in the light of meditation in a minute, when we make a commitment to a relationship, and that is what an act of faith means. It means that you are giving yourself as wholeheartedly as you can to the one or the thing that you are entering into relationship with. And that is, what is that? I mean, that's giving your whole self as far as you can at that moment to a process. And none of us know that process. None of us know, those of you who are married, you don't know the person you're marrying fully at that moment. And in the same way as you enter into a community, you may come and visit and so on, but you don't know the life, the spirit, the people in that community. So, life is a knife edge, isn't it? And I remember a very wise old friend of mine, she died when she was 92, and she was a very wise, loving, non-judgmental person, so her grandchildren were always coming to see her and telling her the problems and so on, and they loved it because they always went away feeling better, and she never told them what to do, but they always went away knowing what they should do, or feeling better about it. And but she said to me once, when they come with their future spouses, she said, I just realised what a risk it is. And she had a very happy marriage, but what a risk it is. You don't know. So, this is the odds. The stakes are very high in this story, and not surprisingly, what we might call the shadow side, or the painful side, or the dangerous side of human life, existence, is put before us very honestly. The one thing that you can count on in the Gospels or with Jesus is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. That's why Simon Weil said once, if I had to choose between Christ and the truth, I would choose the truth, because I wouldn't be going very far in the direction of the truth before I fell into the arms of Christ. So this makes us realize, I think, why this feature of the Gospels is so insistent. this betrayal, this mystery, this dark question mark, enigma of the betrayal of Judas. And not only Judas, of course. The others betray him in a less dramatic or intentional way. And we'll see how the early gospel writers and thinkers must have tried to deal with this in their different versions of the story. So just remember what we heard yesterday in the Gospel of John and compare it to what we hear in today's Gospel from chapter 26 of Matthew. Then one of the 12, the man called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and said, "What are you prepared to give me if I hand him over to you?" Hand over is to tridere, to betray. They paid him 30 silver pieces. And then, from then onwards, he began to look for an opportunity to betray him. Well, what does that tell us? Does it give us any sense of his motive? Are we supposed to think about his motive? Is the story asking us to say, why did Judas do this? Should we know? Is it necessary to know? In terms of the story. I mean, if you were making a film of it, you'd need to come up, Hollywood would say, well, you've got to put something in there, you know. Maybe there's a sexual element somewhere, or you know, you have to dramatize it somehow. But we don't know, do we? It's not that kind of a storytelling, but the bareness, the rawness of this description is very powerful. It's rather similar to Iago in Othello. We don't really know why Iago is such a horrible person, why he wants to destroy the marriage of Othello and Desdemona. Very little glimpses of what it may be, but we don't quite understand it. So anyway, we don't know why, and this monetary element is presumably more symbolic. 30 pieces of silver is a biblical symbol. It's more symbolic than actual. So we just have to say we don't know. Now on the first day of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus to say, "Where do you want us to make the preparations for you to eat the Passover?" He said, "Go to a certain man in the city and say to him, 'The Master says, my time is near. It is at your house that I am keeping Passover with my disciples.'" The disciples did what Jesus told them, and they prepared the Passover. Why do you think it's necessary to have those details in the story? What's it actually telling us? Just saying they came to Jesus and said, "Where do you want to have the meal?" And he said, "Go to so-and-so and book a room, try to get a quiet table in the corner." And why do we need to hear that? What does it tell us, do you think?
Jesus was making all the decisions about, they're not referring to him to set the scene.
Okay. But certainly, yes, okay, so they're asking him because it was something important. But they probably even said, "What should we eat?" But there was something important about this meal, yes. My time is near. So in the Gospels there's always the sense or specific statement that Jesus knows what is happening. That's why he can accept it, because he knows what's happening, and also why even though he is being betrayed, he becomes a victim, he becomes an unjustly accused person, is unjustly executed, tortured. Despite all of this passivity, actually, he isn't a passive victim, is he? Why is he not a passive victim?
He prepares.
Hmm?
He prepares.
And he prepares for it. Okay, he is prepared for it. He's conscious of it. He knows what's happening, and he accepts it. And therefore, it becomes not a passivity, but a passion. When we talk about the passion of Christ, we're going through this painful passage, and he knows he's got to go through it. He doesn't want to. We saw in the Garden of Gethsemane, he wouldn't have been human if he'd said, "Oh, good, I'm going to be executed tomorrow." So he didn't want it, and he resisted it, but then he overcame his own resistance by accepting it. And I think we shouldn't imagine that, he had a little private camera, eternal camera running, which showed him everything, so he didn't actually suffer. Okay, so then it says, when evening came, he was at table with the 12. And while they were eating, he said, "In truth I tell you, one of you is about to betray me." But this is a different account of, than yesterday, where or expressed differently. They were greatly distressed and started asking him in turn. So we don't hear Peter, and the Peter-John dialogue isn't there. They started asking him in turn, "Not me, Lord, surely." So remember, we saw yesterday that what disturbed them was that, who is it? Could it be me? Because we are all capable of betrayal. And they're hoping it won't be them. And he answered, "Someone who has dipped his hand into the dish with me will betray me. The Son of Man," that's me, "is going to his fate, as the scriptures say he will. But alas for that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. Better for that man if he had never been born." Judas, who was to betray him, asked in his turn, "Not me, Rabbi, surely?" And Jesus answered, "It is you who say it." So, what I think we might see here also is the mind of the early Christian community dealing with this oral tradition that he was betrayed by one of his own, and trying to make sense of it, trying to put it into a pattern of meaning. And one way of doing that is to just demonize Judas, that he was stealing money from the common purse, another gospel suggests. So, but I think, but the true meaning of it shouldn't just focus upon the individual, but upon this flaw in human relationship, this sin, this capacity for falsehood, maybe through no fault of our own. If relationships sometimes die through no fault, and people struggle hard and long and suffer a great deal. There's no worse suffering than dealing with a dying relationship, dying in that way, and coming to accept that it's dying requires a great deal of moral courage and truthfulness. So these things happen, and in those situations, we have to accept it, just as Jesus accepted, rather than trying to demonize the other partner. I mean, most murders that are committed by a very easy soul within about 5 minutes, because it's a husband or a wife killing their former partner. So this is what is it a failure of? This is a failure to be able to accept, as Jesus shows we can, to accept the disappointment of our hopes, the betrayal of our expectations, maybe with or without the infidelity of the other person, but to accept that in a way in which we do not demand vengeance, revenge, or we don't want to inflict pain upon the person through whom pain is coming to us. That is precisely what Jesus does not do. He doesn't try, he tells the truth, but he doesn't try to take revenge. Okay, so it does show us how to deal with this inevitable aspect. And it will come in some form or other. It may not be the end of a relationship, but in some way our expectations, our hopes are at times and in the process of a relationship changed. Maybe disappointed, but they change anyway. So, let's just look at this, try to apply this truth to our experience of meditation. That's the best way we have of understanding meditation as a spiritual path or practice or journey, is as a relationship. Meditation is about relationship. So you could approach it, as I've said before, just as a technique. You don't have a relationship with the technique, you're using the technique. But if you're using something or someone, you don't really have much of a relationship with them. But in a relationship, there is a sharing, an attention that you give to the other, which is the risk of yourself. To pay attention is to love. And when you pay attention, you enter into a relationship with something when you take it seriously. That's what we say. We talk about, is the relationship serious now? Meaning, are you getting close to the point where you will make a commitment? And you may express that commitment in different ways. Are you prepared to make this sign of a commitment through which you can give yourself as wholeheartedly as you can? And we all have big limitations, but to give yourself as wholeheartedly as you can at that moment to the other. Is it getting serious now? So think of meditation as relationship rather than as technique. And then it makes sense, because actually the first thing meditation does is to change your relationship with yourself. It brings you to a new kind of self-knowledge. It will make you aware of how often your ego betrays your true self. And we just get into the habit of betrayal with the ego. Maybe it's a habit that's been formed by fear, by woundedness in the past, a lack of trust, a lack of knowledge or experience. So the ego is constantly betraying us, or letting us down, or handing us over to do things, or say things, or act in a way that is not who we really are, not who we know we really are, or not who we really want to be. So the first level in which meditation expresses itself as about relationship is in our relationship with ourselves. We begin, first of all, to accept ourselves. And this is why there is such a deep and strong feeling, even though it's difficult to put your finger on it or to describe it, or maybe you don't want to describe it to people, but a feeling that I can accept myself as I am. And that's exactly what Jesus did. Accepted those who were betraying him as they were, without blaming them or demonizing them. Even though his disciples may have gone on to demonize those who betrayed him, it was not what Jesus did. So we do that in meditation. We learn to accept ourselves as we are, to come to a self-knowledge, self-awareness, and the reason that we begin to find ourselves in more peaceful and more harmonious is precisely because we are not becoming more perfect. We may still make the same mistakes. The ego may still trip us up regularly. We may be hooked into certain patterns of mind because they've been there for so long, and they're related to such deep traumas, or pain, or abuse, or fear, or lack of trust in our lives, that we don't even know why we're like this. So the process of real change may be gradual. But we can at least accept ourselves as we are. And that's a huge shift in consciousness, and a very different kind of relationship with ourselves. And then what happens? Of course, as we're in a different relationship with ourselves, we begin to realize that we are entering into a new level, new quality of relationship with other people. Remember the little meditation group I was telling you about in that workplace, where they found that this negative personality was still the negative personality they were, but there was a change in the nature of the relationship, an acceptance and a patience, a tolerance, a compassion. And as long as we're not showing those things to ourselves, then we're not going to be able to show them to anybody else. So changing the relationship with ourselves is inevitably going to begin a process of changing our relationship with other people. And we may not be even the first person to be aware of that shift. It may be, for example, that somebody says, the story we often tell is a true story of a woman who was meditating. Her husband was very kind of scathing about meditation, and she was always trying to get him to meditate because it would be good for him and it would change him into what she wanted him to be. And so he got fed up with this, and he said, look, if you want to meditate, you meditate, but leave me alone. I won't interfere with you, you just do your thing. So she did. And after a year, they were having breakfast one day, and he said, have you meditated this morning? And he had never mentioned meditation in the whole year. So she was a bit suspicious. And so she said, no, I'm actually going to meditate later. So he said, I might join you today. And she was even more suspicious. And she said, well, why? What's up? And he said, well, I've been watching you very closely this past year, and I appreciate the fact that you didn't put any pressure on me to do this. But you've been much easier to live with. And I can see a lot of improvements in you. So I'd like some of those for myself. Well, so you may not be the first person to realize that your relationships with other people are changing. But other people certainly will. So meditation is lived out, really. The spiritual meaning of it and the spiritual life of the meditation is lived out within the field of our relationships. And that's, of course, where we find ourselves and find our identity, in that field, that network of relationships. So let's just look very briefly then at the stages of the spiritual journey as described in the Desert Fathers tradition. They recognize, as St. Benedict did, that there's such a thing as the first fervour of conversion. So this is like the romantic stage. This is the 6 months or so of being totally romantically infatuated, involved, and you think you have found the perfect computer partner. No computer could have chosen this person better for you. So there's maybe a period where you feel this total joy and happiness, and you will never be sad again, never lonely again. You've got everything. So this, you see, and it's comparable to many other new things we start. It could be the way we start a job, a job that you wanted, or a course that you wanted to start, and you have great hopes for it, and everything seems to be going well. Or it could be entering into a community which you idealize or romanticize in this way. And you think these are all, wonderful people, they're so wise and mature and integrated, and I'm going to learn so much by being with these people. So I once, many years ago, listened to a man tell me of a tragic event that occurred in his marriage, and he said, I cannot understand how this happened. He said, we had been married for I don't know how many years, some years, and he said, we loved each other exactly as we had when we first fell in love. We never changed, we never went through it. Well, her behaviour obviously showed that wasn't true. So we should, in other words, it's not. I'm not being cynical. I mean, this is a beautiful bonding mechanism. Nature makes use of it, and it's a beautiful manifestation at the beginning of the journey of love. But this journey, this process, is a journey, and it takes us to new stages, because it changes us as we proceed. So we can't cling to any one stage of the journey. So then the Desert Wisdom says we then move in, maybe by degrees, into what they call the state of achadia. And achadia is this feeling of loss, we were talking about this morning, or of separation from the very thing that we had been so optimistic and hopeful about at first. So think of your meditation. You start to meditate with a great deal of hope and enthusiasm, and you think it's all going to be simple and easy. And then the meditation becomes a little harder to do. The daily discipline, the sacrifice that you need to make in any relationship, that becomes harder to do, to make the time for meditation. So you start to skip, you start to shorten the time, or during the meditation you just sort of give up and start freewheeling and daydreaming. So, in other words, there's a feeling here that you're disappointed, it's not producing the results anymore that it promised. There can be a feeling of anger, disappointment. I mean, I'm talking about the meditation, but it would also apply to anything that you've committed yourself to. The feeling that it's disappointing you, letting you down, betraying you. And that produces anger and sadness and confusion and the desire to pull out or to pull back. It depends. And most of us do give up at some point. And then something brings us back, because something that we think has betrayed us is actually remaining faithful to us. And that's the relationship that we are entering into in the meditation, is an experience ultimately of total faithfulness. So, anyway, Achedya can come in all sorts of packages, and extreme, almost to the point of despair and depression, or just a feeling of kind of impatience, feeling I should be doing something else, some other techniques, some other practice, would speed up the process or be more enjoyable or easier. So all sorts of mental games and changes of weather interiorly. But not an easy period of adjustment. So we're adjusting to the relationship in the meditation and to the meditation, but we don't quite know where it's going to take us. We have to recommit ourselves to it. And then the desert teachers say something great happens. After you've gone through whatever you need to go through in this period of readjustment to the relationship, you break through into what they called apatheia, which is health of soul. This is a really thrilling sense of well-being, of integration, of wholeness, of balance, of harmony, and all the things in you and in your life are now working together in the best possible way. It's coming out of the generosity and the health within yourself, and you see very clearly, the goodness of your own nature, and you see the benefit of meditation to you in realizing that. So, I don't know if you have to sit on the floor. So this is apatheia, and then they have a wonderful insight, because you might say, well, that's it, I just want to stay. What's the matter? No, so you have to move. You won't rest until you move, so you have to move over there.
Sorry.
Okay, you are welcome, but you have to keep moving. You haven't arrived yet. So the next stage is what they call agape. And they say the child of apatheia is agape. What is agape? Agape is where we are boosted out of the orbit of the ego. There's a lot of ego still in the other stages, in those earlier stages of the romantic stage, where we have expectations, we want to possess it and control it. Even in the health stage, we want to stay where we are. But in the stage of agape, we transcend the boundaries of the ego and enter into that boundless love, which is non-egoic, non-egotistical love, which is actually a sharing in the love of God. So, if we take the big picture, which is what, of course, the story of the Passion that we're entering into tomorrow is about, taking the big picture of human life, development, and of our relationship to God. and to each other within that. Betrayal can be dealt with. It isn't fatal or terminal. It doesn't need to be, as it was for Judas, of course, a self-destructor that led him to hang himself. So it doesn't need to be like that. Peter, who also betrayed or disowned Jesus, wept. So he's often shown in iconography with his deep sort of tear channels down his cheek. So the story deals with this dark and painful and embarrassing and shameful and worrying aspect of betrayal in human life. And it has to deal with it, because if it didn't deal with it, it wouldn't be redemptive. There would be something in it that it was frightened to address, just as we may be frightened to face some of the dark corners of our own history or our own personality or our own capacities. But the story right from the very beginning says we're going to look at this question of life, humanity, and our relationship to ultimate reality, to God. We're going to take it as a whole. We're going to deal with every aspect of it. And that's what enables us to feel that we are part of the story. It knows us even better than we know ourselves. And it enables us to begin to see why it is redemptive, what redemption really means.